use the seat.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thanks for coming. My name's Claire. I'm the Assistant Director here at the German American Heritage Center. We're happy to have Ellen Tsagaris here to talk about the history of toy making in Germany. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the exhibit on the first floor, it's all about German toys and all the different types of toys that have been inspired by German manufacturing. And many of the items on display are on loan from Ellen's museum, the American Doll and Toy Museum in Rock Island. So I will introduce Ellen, and I also have a couple announcements. I know many of you are members, but if you're not a member, programs like this are usually free for members, and we're offering $5 off membership this month. So if you're not a member and are interested, you can grab a brochure from the front desk. And if you'd like to, purchase a membership, it's good for a year, and you can also do that at the front desk. But anyways, Ellen is, she has her PhD, and she has collected dolls since age 3. She gives lectures, she stages museum exhibits, appraises, and also makes dolls. Dr. Tsagaris writes books and articles about dolls, and she has won several writing awards and appeared on radio and television programs. She is currently the executive director of the American Doll and Toy Museum in Rock Island, Illinois. And like I said, many of her items are on display on the first floor, and she brought some goodies to share with us today. But I will let her get started. So welcome, Ellen.
Thank you, Claire. And thank you, everyone, especially for coming out on a very, very hot day. That's real dedication, and I appreciate it. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the museum. We moved from 1303 30th Street to 3059 30th Street, which is the old library, the 3031 branch. When I was a kid, I used to dream that they sold dolls there. Well, we don't sell them, but there are dolls there now. And my first books about dolls, I guess, came from there. So we have a long history of that. We have 6,000 items on display in the main room. We have 2 other rooms we're working on opening, and we're still unpacking. So we are very much a work in progress. We're always changing exhibits. We're always changing little programs that we do. And we want to upstep on our community involvement. Here's the building. A lot of you will recognize this building. And there's our beautiful sign. And we've done programs here. GAHC has been very kind to me about allowing us to do exhibits and programs. We've done nutcrackers, teddy bears, German dolls themselves and their history, Barbie, of course, and Lily, metal dolls. We've done witches. We've done German princesses, we've done vampires, and we've done one on Hogan's Heroes, which will become relevant here in a minute. This whole museum, this has been my whole life. A lot of people, I guess, who know me didn't realize that, but I started collecting when I was 3 with 2 dolls that belonged to my grandmother that my mother gave me. My grandmother and her sister, when they were growing up, didn't have toys. Their father died when they were 6. They went to school to learn to be seamstresses, and when they grew up, they realized that they really loved dolls. And it's kind of the story from my other grandmother too, my dad's mother. She and my mom's mom actually went to school together. But they kept running into wars and other disasters, and barely had enough to eat. So when people started traveling, and my family's been everywhere but Antarctica, but Dr. Tweet went there, so he counts. So my family, I guess, has been everywhere and been in the military and lived abroad and worked abroad, and they brought dolls back. And I used to go with them when I was very young. I went everywhere. So we decided a long time ago we were going to put this museum together. It took us 20 years. It was a lot of stops and starts. It took a year to set up what we have now, and as I said, we're still at it. We are not for profit. I think we're the poster children for not-for-profit. Simply because, as I was telling Hetty, we opened for 3 months in 2019, and then we had to close because of COVID. Although, you know, they had that 10-person rule. That building we were in was so small, I don't think 10 people could have been in there. So I don't see what the point was. It's a lot bigger now. So we were able to purchase the library for the museum. And we like to say that Dolls and Toys are humanity's historians. These are the first known representations of the human figure. They're from the Neanderthals. And they date back 430,000 plus years. What we know is that we don't know a lot about these people, these predecessors, unless you've read The Clan of the Cave Bear, and then maybe you have an idea. These, you can see their little etchings and their little designs sort of on them. They were, we think, personal deities that people carried with them to protect them. They've been found in settlements in the Jordan Valley in Israel, but also all over Europe, different places. So that's kind of where we start. The next round of figures are the Venus figures, the goddesses that have been found in Austria, in Willendorf, and in Czechoslovakia and other places. At first, everybody thought they were idols. They've been found in burials. They've been found made of materials that traveled from one place in Europe to another, so people were sort of, well, like they do now. You take a trip, you buy a souvenir. The netting that she has on her head that almost look like cornrow braids is something that, again, due to burials and cave paintings and things like that, anthropologists think that they may have been grandmother figures. And they're so small that one of the textbooks that I used in school when I was teaching said that they may well have been given to children to protect them as toys. A kid will make a toy out of anything. I'm you know, testament to that. And they're small, and they date about 40,000 years, 25,000 to 40,000 years. This is the goddess. For anyone who knows Wicca, she is still very vibrant today and revered today. And almost all of them don't have a face. There is one from France that has a face on it. Here's one from Holderness, I think, and she doesn't have a head. They just skip the head. And then this is a display from the museum. And this is the Lion Man figure that was originally found in Turkey. It's about 10,000 years old. Then there are other little figures. There's some axes. There's some figures of Athena, and other things that represent different deities that were made even in ancient times. So they were inspired by the ancient world. During the Middle Ages, people did have dolls. You'll see them in paintings. You see references to them. And you find them in places like clock figures, plague pits, other burials, and in puppets, which maybe even predate the use of dolls in the society that we know. Some of the puppets, like the marionettes that were made by Bill Baird and Tony Sarg, people of Swiss and Germanic origin, are at the McNider Museum because Bill Baird did the Sound of Music puppets. He and Tony Sarg also worked on the Thanksgiving Day parade balloons. So we have them to thank for that. There were jumping jacks. There were all kinds of figures that we're going to get to in a minute. There were woodcuts in a book called The Hortus Sanitatis. And here's some of the clock figures and the famous cuckoo clocks from Germany. And then I brought the poodle clock because that one is from the 50s and that one is made in Japan, but the originals are from Germany. So that Germany has influenced toy making literally all over the world, and I think in some ways maybe they still dominate it. Okay, so here's the two puppet and doll makers from the Hortus Sanitatis, and that's about 14th and 15th century. And then in the middle is the baptismal figure. I made two of them as paper dolls so you can see them a little more close up. We think they're baptismal figures because where you think you see these buttons, there were places for coins. So somebody could afford to have either silver or copper, whatever they were made of. They could afford to buy these. And they kind of are also fashion dolls. That's kind of how women dressed. And you covered your hair because hair care was not what it is today. And a lot of people lost their hair from plagues and illnesses. Then for boys, of course, they're toy soldiers. Many came from Germany. The Leonardslauts in particular, 15th century, they are of German origin. They are knights, and they were given sort of as a rite of passage in honor of St. Leonard, and they were called Leonard's louts. These are very rare. You see them in a few European museums. Okay, Lucas Cranach, the younger and the elder, were famous for painting people enjoying leisure. So here we have Princess Maria of Saxony with her doll. Probably these are wooden dolls, kind of like the ones that you saw people making in the woodcuts. And he's got like a little riding crop or something. There are other paintings where you see the kids running and playing games. They have hoops. They have things that look like board games and marbles. A few years ago, we did an exhibit of nutcrackers and their relatives for the Geneseo Library, and this just kind of shows you the variety. The nutcrackers, again, that's something they found in Neanderthal encampments. Things that were used with the nuts, that they used to sort of crack the nuts and provide people with sustenance as well as entertainment. We all know the story of the Nutcracker Prince. I'll give you a hint. If you have not seen the Barbie movie, I don't want to spoil it, but this theme of dolls coming to life in the Nutcracker, in Coppelia, in stories like Pygmalion, it's alive and well in the Barbie movie. And here are some of the figures from the region of Erzberga, the wooden toys, of so many varieties, and there are a lot of them in the exhibit. There are cars, there are trains, there are these villages, there are the animals. There are Noah's Arks of different kinds, carved in many regions, and many of these appear like at the Nuremberg Christmas markets, and I'm sure many of you have been there. Okay, this is one of the oldest, quote, doll houses we have in a museum. Dates from 1639, called the Stromer House. And these would have been instructive. I heard somebody talking about it earlier. They would have been made to teach young girls how to keep house, but also adults collected these, if you know the miniaturist.
Yeah.
And the Nuremberg baby houses were famous. Some of them were cabinet houses. The ones from Holland were the same way. Doll houses go before this, though. Miniature rooms have been found in Egyptian tombs. Miniature pots and pans and accessories for kids have been found in Greece, Rome, and all over the ancient world. And you're not going to believe who started the miniature collection, still owned by the kings and queens of England. Can anybody guess? Henry VIII.
Of course.
Liked miniatures. And it's been kept up even to this day. The monarchs add to it. Queen Elizabeth added quite a few. We'll see if Charles does. One of the famous examples of a miniature town is in Montplaisir, and these are 17th, early 18th century. Many of them are wax dolls. There are a few that are wooden. This is sort of like the nativity scenes and the creche scenes that were popular all over Europe, where you didn't just have the Holy Family in a stable, you had a whole village, and people competed. I mean, they would fill their homes with them. Okay. This is the region where many, many wooden dolls were made. Queen Victoria had 132 of them. She had more dolls than that, but her favorites were these little wooden dolls that are still in existence. And this is sort of an overview of the area. It's a beautiful place. And a lot of toy makers. So here's some of the more traditional figures. And then these are the dolls that Queen Victoria and her governess dressed. So she was an early collector, I guess you would say. Still very popular. Okay, and these are some of the other toys and dolls that we had on display at Christmas here. And they were from my collection. So we have the mechanical, the piano. We have a vintage metal nutcracker and a great big one. We've got a troll. And then we have a couple paper mache dolls. This would have been like the kind of figure that, and she's seen better days, I realize, but she would have been in a nativity scene or a creche. And then there are a couple dolls that have German costumes. This is an American doll dressed like a German girl. So again, the influence is wide. Couple great books. German professor Manfred Bachmann wrote Dolls the Wide World Over, and he did a photo study primarily of doll faces. Fascinating stuff. Kind of the Bible for people who want to study doll history is a museum curator named Max von Bain, who wrote Dolls and Puppets in 1927. It's still produced as dolls. You can find it through Dover Books and Amazon. And of course, kind of the Bible is the Sieslix, the German Donmark's book. Here's some of the famous makers, and it's alluded to in the display. Many of these people were Jewish families who disappeared, as in the case of Simon and Halbig, who used the Star of David as a hallmark around 1938, which is about the time my family took a vacation to Europe that lasted 8 years. Not good. But these are some of the more popular makers. The interesting one to me, and the most prolific, is Armand Marseille, who was a French Huguenot family. He was born in Russia, French name, and lived in Germany, and ran German doll factories, and made heads and parts. They made heads and parts for each other. Okay, Thuringia is the home of Bach, and it's also the home of many doll makers, and it's often called the Valley of the Dolls for Germany. China heads, a lot of us might be familiar with if you've seen the Disney film Child of Glass. There's a China-headed doll or porcelain-headed doll there. Around 1949, a woman named Emma Clear began a business where she would reproduce some of the early China heads. It's kind of when doll collecting was becoming very popular. They also made little dolls called Badekinder or Frozen Charlottes. We have a display downstairs. Some are quite small, some are quite large. They're based on a ballad where a young girl was going to a New Year's Eve party and froze to death on the way there because she wouldn't wear a cloak. Now, you try explaining that to the brownies. I didn't have the heart to tell them when I did that program that she died. I just said she got very, very, very sick, so always wear your coat. So these are varieties of dolls made of china and untinted porcelain. Here are a couple of them. The girl in blue in the corner dates from the 1840s just about. This is a brown-eyed one, which is very unusual. Here's a vintage one. That is a German character doll because the Germans led, in part due to the Bauhaus, but also other artistic movements, they were going for realism. They didn't like the sort of sweet-faced, dolly-faced dolls that we have in the exhibits downstairs. They wanted a little bit more. This one is based, it's a vintage doll based on an Armand Marseille doll called Just Me, and the interesting thing is, this doll is not only reproduced today in porcelain, it's been made in vinyl and composition. It was that popular. And it does happen that some of those early molds have found their way into the modern doll companies. And this one, I just have to say, that's an American plastic doll. My mother knitted the dress. My mother used to dress them, and my grandmother, so she found her way in there. This one I dressed. It is a German celluloid head. So that's kind of the fun of having these things. You can work with them. In the center is a metal head doll. We did an exhibit here, and that's one of the things that I've researched and written about. Look how beautiful that is. That's tin. And that is from Rosalie Wile's museum. I bought it from her several years ago. Sadly, she passed away. She had a beautiful museum near Seattle, Washington. Next to her is kind of a utensil doll. She's a corkscrew dressed like a woman with a metal head. Here's some more from that exhibit. We have the rod puppet. We have ads from the Edison phonograph doll, which we do have one now. We've got the Jungfrau cups, mechanical dolls with metal parts. And I think this one, either my husband or Jerry Lowe took this photograph. It's been so long now I can't remember, but Jerry and my husband were taking pictures. Holzmasse by paper mache, you know, which is kind of like, how many made paper mache Easter eggs in school? I did. Yeah. Well, this is a doll head, and it's by a firm called Kunonato Dressel. And the interesting thing is that people who've been credited for making one kind of doll actually made a lot of different types of dolls or sold them under their label. And Dressel was one of them. Big distributor was a German named George Borgfeldt, or Georg Borgfeldt. He worked with Rose O'Neill and Grace Story Putnam to do the Cupies and the Bilos and got them distributed to the United States. I've got over here a reference if you want to look up some more about him. I've also seen dolls labeled George Borgfeldt, which is kind of interesting, after he died. So the company went on. We've got some from the 50s that say that on their boxes. He was kind of difficult to get along with. Grace Story Putnam in particular was just ready to clobber him. She felt she couldn't deal with him very well. And Rose O'Neill had her issues too. Mother of the Cupies, Rose O'Neill, do you know anything else about her that makes her sort of special in history in general? She's one of the suffragettes. So she did sketches for the Cupies along with Jello ads, and the Cupies are marching for votes. She was also very well known as a fine artist, did big sculptures. The monster people, they were called, or the monster sculptors. 2 immigrants to the United States, and these are Greiner dolls, and Greiner's credited with maybe the first patent for a doll, although there were many Germans making them before then in the States. Again, these are paper mache. One of these was made for the postage stamps. Okay. Interesting woman. Lottie Pritzel made dolls similar to the dolls standing with the wire frame and the fancy red dress. And you can see one of them. They were art dolls. These were not meant to be toys. Lottie Pritzel influenced Rainer Maria Rilke and made him write about dolls, but not in a good way. So if you expect to find a poet who's going to memorializing dolls, no, he had a lot of issues, and one of them was dolls. On the other hand, Kafka, who also had his share of issues, did a very nice thing at one point. He wrote a story. He met a little girl in the park, and the little girl had lost her doll, and she was crying. And Kafka, who was a bachelor and not known particularly for any romantic or other attachments, took pity on her. And he wrote letters to her from the doll. And the doll was telling her that she's okay and not to worry and everything is fine. She's happy with a new family. She's sure they'll meet again. So if Kafka did one thing, he did that one act of kindness for this little girl. He's a little weird to read and teach, but I gotta say, for that alone, I have to like him. Okay, this is a company that sold dolls all over Europe. The company is Ari. They're little dolls for the most part. My godfather's brother bought me a whole handful of them in Greece when I was visiting there. And many of these were made in factories in East Germany. There are a few marked West Germany. Now they say Ari dolls. They're also used to dress dolls from other countries. I've seen dolls from Yugoslavia and the Slovak Republic wearing costumes. And it's these little rubber dolls. Great for dollhouses. In fact, we have dollhouse families. Steiff, of course, is legendary. There is a letter that I brought in that's downstairs from Marguerite Steiff herself. This is a Steiff-inspired bear, but you can see my big one downstairs, who is real Steiff. We have another very big German bear. We have a couple huge ones. They're modern. They're the last 30 years, but they're very big. I can't carry them. One of them, when he has to be moved, rides in my husband's truck, waving. And nobody has ever stopped or noticed. I guess it's perfectly normal to have great big teddy bears. This is the turtle, the celluloid German companies. Again, many a conglomeration, many made by some of the people who made this dolls. One of these dolls, one like it, is in the Holocaust Museum. This little girl managed to carry it all the way through Auschwitz, which I don't know how she kept it. I don't know how she survived, but she did. All right, Betty Boop was created by two brothers from Austria, immigrants. She was doing Snow White before Disney was. I want to say she's a very elusive, hard woman to find. We must have enough Betty Boops to fill a room. And they're all packed away, and I couldn't find one. Not even a little brooch, not a sweater, not a purse, nothing. But Betty Boop is very much part of this tradition of Germanic-speaking toys. And German toys in general. All right, well, we know Lily and Barbie. We've done a program on that. This elegant creature is a build Lily doll. Some are made in Hong Kong and elsewhere, and they're called Hong Kong Lily. They predated Barbie, and this is the 3-foot Barbie. So, also called, I'm sorry, the Roman Polanski Barbie. We won't go into that. Ruth Handler, who came up with the idea for Barbie and who asked Jack Ryan to sculpt the doll to her specifications, bought a couple Lily dolls in Europe. One for her, one for her daughter Barbara. They were running Mattel. They thought, wow, this might be something we can use. So there is a Barbie, a real one. Her name is Barbara Handler. Her brother is Ken. She does look like Barbie. If you see her now, the later Barbies of the 70s, and she has this beautiful long blonde hair. I mean, and to say that people don't look like Barbie, yeah, they do. I've known people, and my mother looked like the bubble cut when she was young. And that's why I ended up with one. She even had the pink suit. You know, Barbie had some pink suits. My mom had one. I have the picture. So to me, there's never been anything controversial, except I think she looked a lot older than maybe 16. Okay, but Barbie is a legend in herself, and her origins are German. And they did get in a lawsuit, but Mattel won over Bild, the company that did Lily. Later companies, the artists Kata Cruz, Keiko and Erna Meyer, who also did Dollhouse dolls, Lissy Bates, and Lissy, one of the oldest companies, still going strong after 200 years. I pronounce it Getz, a little doll in the box, that supposedly went out of business a few years ago, but they were still appearing in places like Tuesday Morning. Sasha by the Swiss artist, and that's what these are, Sasha Morgenthaler, who again was creating mannequins, and some were made by Getz and some were made in England. And then my favorite one, Martha Armstrong Hand. Anybody heard her name before in connection with toy making? Well, she was German. She survived World War I. She grew up in World War II, and her family left the country. They had to flee. She got a job with Mattel and created little kittles. And this doll was really had a hard life, worse than me even. And this is tearful, and she will move, and she pouts, and then she smiles. Well, this is one of her dolls. Baby First Step was another one. Some of the things like Baby See and Stay. This is Martha Armstrong Hand, originally from Germany, which I think is just kind of cool. Here is a doll made during Kata Cruz's lifetime. Next to her is a roly-poly doll made in Germany, wearing a Greek or Albanian costume, and the first queen of Greece, the first modern queen of Greece, came from Munich. And her name was Amalia. And to this day, the national costume bears her name. So that's kind of a tribute. And of course, there are the other toys, the musical instruments, the music boxes, like this one that's about 50 years old, belonged to my aunt. It channels Hummel figurines, and there were Hummel dolls of all kinds too. That plays a theme from Love Story, so you can sort of wax, well, it did play it, be a little bit romantic. They're beautiful Swiss, German music boxes from Henri. There are porcelain ones. Those of us who love Hogan's Heroes, I will note, there's an episode where they're discussing, they think the war is over, they're discussing in Colonel Klink's office what they would be doing after the war, and Sergeant Schultz says, I'll go back to my toy factory. Because that's just how pervasive the German toy industry was. Sergeant Schultz has a toy factory in civilian life. Later, he started a Perry Mason episode called The Case of the 9 Dolls. So he had something going on with toys. Oops. I'm going to do that. You know, I just did
Escape.
something like that. Okay. He's going to say it's going to blow up. Artistic toys, and I have to thank Claire for this, because she brainstormed a lot of wonderful ideas. The crayons, Moonbacher artworks, Faber-Castell, coloring and painting and doing sketches similar to the kinds of things these little kids did for the luchadores masks. Beautiful things. A lot of them have their origins in Germany. Animals in nature. The Noah's Ark, wooden ducks. The little giraffe group that's downstairs, like in a matchbox, so tiny. The Schoenhut circus animals. All sorts of sensory toys and candy containers that were made in Germany. I brought my big clown Pez, that's of Swiss origins, and we've had Pez exhibits. We're just talking about maybe we'd like to do another one. There were noisemakers, of course, the Nutcrackers by Steinbach and other companies. Optical toys like kaleidoscopes, which we've done. This Nutcracker is my first one. I couldn't find them anywhere, right? So I'm 8 years old, and we see this one in the Amanas, and I got it that Christmas. Now they're everywhere, they're iconic. You and I have talked about that. The Nutcrackers are made everywhere, and the whole world knows them. And my church, which is a Greek Orthodox church, does Christmas invitations, and what's on the cover? A Nutcracker. So he too is something that just spread the history and the culture of German toys all over the world. Here's some of the other things. Milch, the toy food, the puzzles. Spielenholz designed this little necklace that you can pull apart. Fisher-Price has made toys like this. Where do you think they got the idea? So again, I mean, here's the train we have downstairs. It's Märklin. Did I say that right? Okay. They made cars, trucks, Zeppelins. We have some big Zeppelins in the museum. This is our small one. We have the Hindenburg flying overhead. So far, nothing's blown up. We hope not, yeah. We have other wooden toys and trains. steam engines, German steam engines, and elastoline figures, marbles, all things made in Germany over the last 150 years or so, still going strong, still collected in their antique and vintage version, still appreciated today by kids. You know, like the Department 56, the porcelain
Okay,
houses.
it's a company name?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's a company name. They do, they have great catalogs. They did farm scenes, if you had a little barn. They did things for railroad figures. They did play sets and animals, and it's kind of like Schleich today.
Okay.
Makes these great animals that you can find all over the place,
Yeah.
and they're very detailed. Okay, so this is one of the books about the trains and the various transportation toys. I'm just putting out some things for further research. Anybody who's interested. Board games, a lot of them in Germany. These are two famous ones. We've got a great display downstairs. Board games too date back to the ancient world. So people had game night. You know, even when Friday night wasn't a big deal, they had game night. Okay, here's some further reading. If you get to the Strong National Museum of Play, where they have at least 35,000 dolls. A friend of mine used to say, don't hold it against her, she has 3 or 4 more than you do. But that's a beautiful web museum, and you can spend hours. It's very well organized. You know, you just click on a category and it takes you to all these pictures. They have a great blog, and that's just a lot of fun. The other one is the Action Figure Museum. It's called the Mego Museum, for Mego action figures. Doll reference, if you're looking up a doll, they don't give prices, but they do give origins, and they've tried very hard to gather as many doll companies as they can. I listed 3 of my books. I'm not telling you to go buy them. You can get the bibliography for free if you have Kindle Unlimited. I don't even know if there are any more of With Love from Tin Lizzie out there. If there are, don't pay $130 for them. They don't have my book. I've caught them at that, a few good places. And then Thinking Outside the Dollhouse is one of my more recent ones. It's a memoir. That too is, if you go to Austin Macaulay, the publisher, or Barnes & Noble, or any of those places, there's an ebook that is just like a couple dollars, if not free by now on Kindle Unlimited. And then I have this one that you can look at. And they're German toys. The Iron Maiden of Nuremberg is discussed in it. Okay. This is called Capital Punishment, Popular Culture, Toys, Games, and Nursery Rhymes, Toying with Death. And this is our little doll sitting in the electric chair. We have a guillotine, a couple of them. Goethe, the great poet, sent his mother to buy a toy guillotine during the French Revolution. And there's a letter that exists where she said, "Shame on you! What's wrong with you?" If you go to this publisher, which is Cambridge Scholars, you can read 40 pages for free. I say that because it's a textbook and I didn't price it, but it's like $70 US dollars. So it's or something like that. It's 70 British pounds or 120 maybe US dollars. So don't buy this one, but you can read it for free. I mean, unless you have a class. If you're out there teaching, see me afterwards, folks. So that was kind of a fun romp that we had with that. Okay, and then some more research. If you can get to the Toy Museum at Branson, they have 6 buildings at least full of toys, more than I do. Again, a few more. The B&B Toy Museum, and our friend Bruce Strader, who started it in Cambridge. It opens first weekend in December and other holidays. Bruce passed away. He was our neighbor. He's our neighbor down the street from the museum. He passed away right before we got this museum going, and I used to see him and he would say, "Oh gosh, I can't wait till you open. I'm going to be there to help you." And sadly, he passed away unexpectedly. But the museum is still there. His family runs it. Museum of the City of New York, the Yokohama Doll Museum, perhaps the largest museum of dolls and toys, Shankar's International Doll Museum in New Delhi. They all have great websites and they're fun field trips. And if you can go there, go. Have you been to Yokohama, you guys? You've been to one of them? Yeah,
Not me.
that's a cool museum. All right, a few acknowledgements. I'm not going to read all of them, but it doesn't take a village, it takes a whole country to put something like this together. I know I don't have everyone there, but I will tell you that these are all people who in some way have contributed. They've either donated to the museum, they have helped me price things, you know, just for my own like insurance purposes. They've helped me identify things. They encouraged me when I was ready to give it up. First and foremost, Dino, my husband, Dino Milani, and our son Mitchell, who comes and helps and has donated his stuffed animals, Star Wars, and T-shirts from grade school to us, and one day to have a truck exhibit. Michael and Hattie Hustedy, who are the other two members of our board. I don't know what I would have done without them. Various friends of mine, Angela from the Rock Island Library, Barry Mueller, who's the publisher of one of the oldest magazines around on dolls, Doll Castle News. Jeff Powell, who is a renowned Duke University law professor, but he reviewed my book, Thinking Outside the Dollhouse, and he loved it. So I'm indebted to him. My friends, Diane Roach, Bibi and Marvin, Michelle Juring and Diane Scroggin, who own Vintage Rose, and I used to be in their building, and they've helped me quite a bit. Various people from my church, my neighbors, Matt and Lori Kiefer Garrison, Michelle and Chuck Mackey, Dr. Tweed and his wife Margaret, all my writers group, my students, the Reverend Charles Fanicus, who is my cousin, and a writer himself, and he's a wonderful person, and he wrote a whole letter about why this was a ministry for children, and I keep it up and look at it when I want to give it up, which doesn't happen often. My dissertation director, I see Rose out there, I see some of the rest of you that I recognize. My teachers, some who made me dolls or taught us to make dolls, Mrs. McAllister and Miss Stickler and Mrs. Foss, who made puppets, and the paper mache eggs I mentioned. Mrs. Wisely, Mrs. Glasner, my art teacher, and my other art teachers who taught me to make cornhusk dolls and let me make dolls for project, Mrs. Schultz from Home Ec, our scout leaders who took us to people's doll collections, largely because they knew I liked them. The Madeiras, Kathy Madeira, who was a friend of ours from very little, Diane Mays, who my babysitter, who made paper dolls for me and for my little friend Brooke. So a lot of these people, my friends, the Coins and the Axe-Ups, who are known as Statler and Waldorf in the museum. So many people out there, and I'm not going to read all of them, but you'll probably remember some of these names when you see them. Judge O'Shea, who actually writes books about toys and stuffed animals and reviewed my books. Other friends of ours that we've known. The people at the Carpellis Museum, I can't tell you, that's a wonderful place. If you have not been there, you need to go. The Brandemeyers, whose family ran the 18th Avenue Doll Hospital. And then there are the people who've left us, in particular my friend Arlene Herron, who was a writer and an artist and a historian. Mickey Brantley, my dear friend, who was an artist for Ashton Drake. Steffi Hammonds, paper doll artist, and as she used to say, techno lady. Keith Kaonis, my boss. Violet Page, who was a doll artist from Galesburg that I knew from the time I was 14 until she passed away when I was 40-something. Suzanne Gibson, doll artist. Jim Fernando, very well-known dealer. When I lived on the West Coast, I would see him at shows. He would take the time and show a little kid which doll was good and what was done to this one and how you could tell a reproduction. Wonderful, generous man. Jonathan Green, very young, whom we lost last December. My friend, the writer Angela Wells. John X, my editor. Diane Hoffman, mother of one of my colleagues from Turn of the Century Antiques. Bruce, that I mentioned. My parents and the rest of my family, because they're almost all gone now, and they were behind this. This whole thing was a love letter to them. And my dad, who carried dolls from all over the world, sometimes very big ones on planes. My students, Gloria Holmes and Christy Pickering, our friend D.A. Horton, the Colemans. Lally Shaver, did anybody know Lally? She ran Lally's Doll Museum in Galena on Magazine Street for many years. Some other people, more of my students. My father-in-law, Lo Milani, our own Ruth Reynolds, and the Princes here from the German American Heritage Center. Pearl and Phil Sinatra, who were good friends of my family and my babysitter. They would bring me dolls. Her mother, Aunt Pearl's mother, they were Aunt Pearl and Uncle Phil. Her mother had connections with John Looney. So we have a doll that ties to John Looney. You'll probably see her mentioned in the film. You see The Road to Perdition. And again, my Aunt Rose and Uncle Tony and their family, and Mrs. McKinney, their neighbor, who gave me dolls and repaired them and made them for me. Grace Dorbeck, local artist. Again, the Brandemeyers. Pat Valancourt, well-known dealer. Pat used to sell dolls to Michael Jackson and toys and things. She had a lot of interesting things to say. Anne Rice. I'm privileged to own 2 of her dolls and several of her books, and I have a letter she wrote to me once. She was my muse in many things, and I miss her. Herr Weber, my German professor. Dr. Parkander and her sister and brother-in-law, Ruth and Art Clokey, who are the creators of Gumby and Davy and Goliath. So, just other people. Mrs. George Stoudehaar, her granddaughter Roxanne Turner brought me her grandmother's collection. My law professor, Alan Vestal, who collected Kachina dolls. All kinds of people who were my students. Our own Nomi Bouglier and Juanita Buck. Just so many people that have gone. And if it were not for them, and if it were not for the history that many, I mean, you know, today we have all these ways of proving things and proving this and proving that, and that's nice. But if it were not for the people who did the early paintings, who made the early dolls and kept records, who went around researching when there was no internet, when books on dolls were hard to find. I know the first book that I did, I didn't have the internet. I, for 25 years, went around looking up things until I got it out there. Without them, a lot of culture, a lot of history would be lost. So here's who we are. Here's where we are on Facebook and Twitter, which is now X. I don't know why. This is X. I X'd you instead of I tweeted you. But we have blogs, and there are other sites that I have that you'll catch on to as you go forward and you look at things. But there are links to other sites. There are many good places on the web and on the net. Also, Lorianne is out here, and I owe her and Nancy Stroll and all my friends from AAUW, from our book group and our organization, American Association of University Women. They're out there. They're full of information, too. This is a doll factory in 1947. It looks like an American factory. But this is, for many years, how dolls were put together all over the world by women sitting at tables and making them piece by piece. So they're mass-produced, but they're not in a lot of cases. So thank you for coming today. I hope you all get to see the exhibit downstairs. You may come and look at this. We have a few more handouts. Thanks, everybody. If you're collectors, happy collecting. If you're not, start. How are we on time? Do we have time for questions, Claire?
Yeah, we do. We have about 15 minutes for questions.
Okay, good. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Well, this is just something I found online, and I'm thinking of going and checking out. A place called Carmel, Indiana. Have you ever heard of it?
Yes.
They have some kind of miniature, I'm not sure if it was called Doll or Toy Factory, but they have a museum there.
Cool.
So just FYI information.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah, it's Carmel, Indiana.
Yes?
Yeah, why do you think Germany was so big in toys? Did it have to do with the storybooks, the fables?
I think it did. I think there were also many, many artists and artisans. I think they had a tradition before some of the rest of Europe did of loving their children and allowing them to have childhood. Because kids were like little adults for a long time. There are dolls from England and France and elsewhere, but some were for adults. They would be dressed, the kids might treat them like babies, but they're just like little miniature mannequins, little adults, me and mini-me. Childhood as we know it kind of emerged around 200 years ago, so I think it was a combination. They were artists, they had the story and the history tradition that involved all kinds of toys. And I think they were also good at promoting them and selling them and sending peddlers all over the world. And I think, even the early French fashion dolls, some of them are called Poupées de Nuremberg. Some of the heads and the parts were made in Germany. It was people like Gemot and Bru and others who began to make their own. But even then, German dolls were sold for the French market. There are some dolls that have like a French head and a German body and vice versa. They used what they had. There were rivalries. They put out booklets where, one German firm or French firm would stamp on the other people's dolls. So But yeah, I mean, and also it just merged from their arts and crafts. Again, you know, the word toy comes from the word trifle. And they made beautiful things. They had a tradition of Christmas ornaments and decorating for Christmas and the Christmas crushes. I think it's called the puts. Puts. So all those things, and again, merged together, and there was a market for it. And again, kids get their hands on dolls. You know, if it's gingerbread or candy that you can eat, or, you know, if it's a game or a toy guillotine.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Yeah.
Do you know if the current doll, the American Girl doll, has any kind of connection to Germany at all, or is it China?
I think it does because she
Okay.
started because she found what sounds like an old German bisque doll that she
Okay.
repaired.
Okay, good.
And the tradition of the dolls and their stories and the accessories and the
Yes,
clothing is both
stories.
French and German.
Okay.
So we have like art dolls like the Gibson Girl that by Charles Dana Gibson. That's a doll. She's got a whole wardrobe, and I think the American Girls sort of follow into that. Yes.
I can answer the question about the early Pleasant Company dolls that were American Girl's predecessor.
Yeah.
Gott's actually made those dolls.
Yes, they did.
Oh, good.
Yes, they did. You're right.
Okay.
Yeah, they did. There's a book, you can get it on Kindle only. It's called Happy Land. And his last name is Lennon, like John Lennon, but I think his initials are RC. And he's I don't know why he didn't get sued. He's done a parody of Pleasant Rowland and the American Girls. She redeems herself at the end, but she doesn't come out as a good person at the beginning. But there are a lot of dolls, and the story of the dolls is in there. So, yes.
Where do paper dolls fit into this whole story?
They were printed certainly in Germany. Paper dolls have their origins as things that people threw into the river to appease the gods in the Orient. Around the time of the French Revolution, paper jumping jacks and other kinds of jumping jacks became popular. Then they were outlawed because it was feared that they would promote deformed children. They started making them also as fashion plates, just like you find them in magazines, like even today. And if you couldn't afford the Pandora or the big doll to come around and show you what to wear, long before we had fashion magazines, the paper doll plates would be out. And men and women, you could sort of decide what they wanted to wear. And then again, kids got a hold of them. Sylvia Plath was a huge collector, and her paper dolls are in the Lilly Library. But we have, I couldn't even tell you how many paper dolls I have. I'm nuts about them. And I used to make them, and we made them when I was little. Yeah, they're real pieces of history. Yeah.
Oh, I'm curious, you've given us an overview and talked about types of toys.
Mhm.
Everything from the stuffed plush to the biscuit, one thing or another. Are there general categories of toys? And by that I mean electric trains
Oh,
and
yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
stuff would be one type of toy.
Steam
But
engines.
then, right, and boats and one thing. I mean, dolls are dolls, but there are all these other kinds of toys. Are there schools of toys that?
There are, and if you get into the people who collect them and look at their articles, they have them divided up by different kinds of marbles and game pieces, and the origins of certain games and how they've gone from country to country. The nesting figures, which are dolls but are not, they're similar to nesting boxes. Those are all over the world. Puppets. Transportation toys is one group of people who collect. They call it their transportation. There are other toys that people like to look at that started out life as weapons, like the yo-yo. Yeah, boomerangs, slingshots, all of which I played with, but I never hit anything. War toys is a big category, not just the soldiers, but war toys and toy guns is something else that was dear. That's what I played with, my confession here. I played with toy guns.
Is there an encyclopedia of
Oh,
toys?
yeah.
I mean,
Several of them, yeah. There's a good one called The Magic of Toys. There's Deborah Jaffe. The gentleman name, I think it's Robert, like the actor maybe, Culp, C-U-L-P-E. the toy theaters, the Pollocks, has a big toy theater collection. So, yeah, I mean, it could be that the doll is the oldest toy, and the oldest, some people say cultural artifact. I think it was a weapon. I think it was a club. Because of fossils they have found of human-like creatures like Australopithecus, and they've just identified another one even older than that, 2 million years old, where one banged the other on the head. So I think, but you don't know, I mean, animals play with toys. My cats and my dogs. My cats have their own basket. If you don't have it where they can get to it, they knock things down. They're really, and we have one little guy, little tuxedo cat. I swear he skips if you bring new toys in the house. He gets so excited. So if we indeed, if those of us who believe it or don't believe in evolution, but we studied it, these ape-like personages, if you want to call them, whatever they were, I'm sure they had their toys too. Sticks and rocks and dried roots. I mean, we still have figures of like ginger root and ginseng root and mandrake root that kind of look like people. So again, a child, a young creature of any kind gets a hold of one of those, they're going to play with it. But yeah, no,
There's a good toy show here in the Quad Cities.
yes, we have a good toy show that comes, I think the next one's December.
No, it's September. I
Oh, it's
believe it's
September.
September 9th, but I'm going by memory.
Thanks. Yeah, there are toy shows, and you can kind of see what people collect, but how they have it grouped at these shows.
Where are they?
QCCA or where?
It's in the Rock Island.
Is this in the Expo Center? And there's one that's also at North Park that comes.
If you look up Quad City Toy Show.
Yeah, Quad City Toy
I
Show.
usually carry the flyers.
He's my neighbor, so he comes, we have flyers at the museum, he visits every so often. Yes, ma'am?
You may have addressed this, but do you feel that toy dolls and puppets are the same category? Or do you, and if so, or if not, why?
Well, I do, because, the broad definition is a doll, is a small figurine, a statue, a puppet, anything that's figural, and is meant to be played with, but now that's broadened because people are collecting them, and some people even include statues and art objects and things like that in the definition. There's a professor named Kenneth Gross, Gross, who has written on puppets and on dolls. He makes the difference. The difference as he sees it is that puppets can be playthings, but they've been used to teach morality and teach history and teach literature long before maybe dolls became popular. They're mentioned by people in the ancient world. If you read the parable of the cave, those exist. They're clay shadow puppets. And sometimes people mistake them for dolls, but really they were used like Chinese opera dolls or bunraku puppets to tell a story, or they were used in the theater. Now dolls are doing that, as we know from Barbie and the Raggedy Ann movies and the Gem movies, and I hate to say it, the Chucky and the Annabelle movies. It's irritating me to no extreme, but I think the one is maybe an object that up to now people thought was merely for play, and the puppets were something that people felt was also artistic and educational. Collectors out there, speak up. What do you think?
Well, I love your book, how you, your thesis and going into that, and it really widened my perspective of
Well, thank you.
thinking outside the dollhouse.
I try. Now, I know one of my friends, he about had a fit, because he said, no, a doll is this. But what did he make? Statues, and he called them dolls.
I don't know if you've heard of mudlarking, but that one figure you had on
Yeah.
there, they find those every once in a while over in London.
Yeah, in the Thames.
Yeah,
There's a
the
lead,
Thames.
there's a lead couple they
It
found.
reminded me
Sure.
exactly of something
Mudlarks.
this one gal dug up, and it's on a horse, so they don't always find them together. That's fascinating. But I have to ask you about the clown Pez. I don't know if the people in the back can see it. What kind of candy and that's
How
huge.
big is
It's
it?
just
Yeah,
bigger
it's a
versions
Pez.
of the peppermint. It's a big
Oh,
peppermint
okay.
Pez, yeah. Yeah, he's
Never
huge,
seen
and
anything like that.
we have some other big ones. I like him because I like clowns, always have. I got to be on Bozo twice when I was a little girl. I don't have a problem with them. A lot of people do. That's fine, but their history's fascinating.
You do?
It is, yeah. I mean, a lot of people just don't like them and don't want them around, but I do.
You read Stephen King.
Who often, yeah. Well, there were
He
some.
ruined clowns.
Yeah, he did. He ruined a lot of things.
Great writer.
Yes.
Do you have somebody there who does like some doll repair?
No, I repair my own. I know people like in the Chicago area who will do it, but I don't do that. I don't work on other people's dolls. It's asking for it. And I learned by doing, and I learned by people like my friend Violet, who used to show me how to do things. And especially when you get into dolls that are tens of thousands of dollars, there's a lot of liability, and I don't want to play with it. My luck, I'll drop it or trip over something. And that'll be that. Anybody else? Everybody got some trinkets? Oh, yeah.
What hours are your museum open? I know where that's at.
Yeah,
That's my first
we
library.
currently are open Saturdays, 11 to 3, or by appointment. I think we're going to close for a couple Saturdays and probably reopen September the 16th, which is a Saturday, and that's because I'm doing the craft show here, so I have to make something.
Okay.
I have to do some painting and other things. And I'm going to make
that's
corn
good.
husk dolls, that's another thing that I like to do. Yeah, but if you have a group or you want to go, another day besides that, call.
Okay.
My business cards are up there, and we'll accommodate. We have groups who come through. We had one from Wisconsin who came by, and we had a really good time. So, thank you, everyone. Thank you. Sure you see Claire's amazing exhibit. She made this possible.
Okay, there we go.